Carl here from Wani, and today I have the sincere pleasure of chatting with a great poet, writer, musician, all around. It is, of course, the one and only Otep Shamaya. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My sincere pleasure. So, you're on the road supporting Cult 45 at the moment, and it is easily one of, if not my favorite record of last year. It is stunning.
Thank you.
But I was curious because, you know, to be this long in a band as intense and can be emotionally raw as Otep, I would imagine that's both cathartic but at the same time incredibly challenging, and I'm kind of wondering what that journey has been like for you, because only you can answer that question.
I guess if volcanoes could talk, I might be able to give you a better answer.
I already love the answer.
I'm full of magma in many ways. I think that I was raised very poor, and so I saw a lot of injustice done to the working class and working peoples, and just even to seeing my mother do 3 jobs, and also knowing how intelligent she was, and yet the opportunities that she wasn't allowed, and yet the neighborhood where we lived, just right across the way, was a more affluent neighborhood, and yet they were all sort of trust fund kids and didn't really care about the world, or didn't care about themselves or their parents or really anything. And so I'm sure there were some, but that was the people that I was able to interact with. So I guess it instilled in me very early on that it was important to stand up for people like me, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start the band. Was, I never liked bullies. I never wanted to be judged based on, where I come from or how I looked or my gender or anything like that. Because if I'm smarter than you, and just because you have more money than me, why should you have more opportunities than me? And so I think that's a lot of my righteous rage comes and indignation comes from just living my formative years, I suppose, just knowing that life is basically unfair, and without folks who will fight for justice and who will fight for fairness, then who will? So I always thought that if I had a platform in order to do it, then I would, and so that's what I've been doing. And unfortunately, in America, there's never it's a wellspring of injustice and corruption and inequality. And so and now that we have Resident Chump, as I like to call him, I have several other names that I enjoy calling him. The orange colostomy bag, several others.
I'm familiar with them all. I've started using them.
Oh, very good. Cheeto Shitler is another one I like. But now that we have him, selected to be in office, Das Vidanya, I think that we've seen a rise now in these people who have held these beliefs for so long, but have been hiding in the sewers, and now they feel like that it's okay for them to see daylight. And I think that a lot of us were surprised that they felt so emboldened, and now many of us, I from the beginning was always someone who stood up to them, but now you're starting to see the majority of Americans who voted against him. He did lose the popular vote by 3 million votes. Starting to see a lot of people standing up and stand against him and standing up for each other, and that's one of the things that I think is really important. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and so when I have heterosexual allies standing up for me, that means a lot, and it also means a lot, I guess, to the general public, because if they're passing laws that discriminate against me, it doesn't affect a heterosexual.
Right.
So if they stand up for me, then that means that they see the injustice in it, and that means a lot as well. So we're always happy to have our allies, and so and that goes down the line to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and on Native American reservation land, which is has been happening even longer than what's been going on in Flint, Michigan, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and our immigration problems that we're having. And I went to when Trump tried to pass that immigration ban. I went to LAX because I live in Los Angeles. I went to LAX airport, and there were 10,000 people there protesting it. And I knew it was serious then. That something was happening, because nobody wants to go to the airport. Right? Like, nobody ever wants to go to the airport. But they finally, there were people there at the airport, and every time someone would arrive, whether they were an immigrant or not, coming from off an international flight, there were people cheering, and sometimes they were confused, like, what's happening? Like, why are they cheering for me? But I think that we're starting to see a change, especially now that this whatever fog that surrounded him, the reality TV idea of this man, is starting to just disintegrate. People are starting to see him for what he truly is, which is just a fraud and a con man, and a unfit sort of bedlamite, who has odd sexual fantasies about his daughter, and which. That's not just me. That's not conjecture. You can Google it. He actually said it on live TV.
Oh, I'm just trying not to laugh over you. That's all.
While she was sitting next to him, they asked what they had in common. He said she said real estate. He said sex, and then he said if she wasn't my daughter, I'd be dating her.
Yeah.
Who says that? I mean, about their own daughter, no matter how beautiful they are. Like, who says that about their own daughter? And there's actual photos now of them, like, open mouth kissing and things. It's very odd. And so I think that getting back to the original question, what is it difficult? I love Colt 45. I love that record. Would I've wanted to write a different kind of record? People ask me that a lot. I don't know if I could. I wrote. The great Nina Simone said it. An artist's duty is to reflect the times that we live in, and this is unfortunately the times we live in. And so, I was compelled to write what the muses were screaming in my ear to say. So, we try to keep our music as diverse and as possible as with regards to different messaging and so forth. But we do try to. We're a political band. We're an art band also. Poetry is very important to us, or it's important to me, and because it's. I'm Irish, so the bards, bards of old.
I'm going to touch on that later.
Good. So I think we're poetry is so important because it allows us to become the narrators of our lives and of the world that we live in, and also the experiences that we've had, or the experiences that we've seen other people have had, and so I think that's important, and it's been minimized so much now that I try to keep it alive because I love it so much. I have such a passion for it. Sure. And so every album that I've ever written, there's always, people know there's always going to be a poem on there, a spoken word piece or something,
Yeah.
And the rest of it is really about, if it's not directly affecting me, then it's a reaction to what I've seen happen to someone else. Just because I'm not an African American in America doesn't mean that I don't stand up for their rights and to be shot by cops, of course. Being unarmed and all of that. I was in the other interview that I did earlier, we were discussing how in America it's so strange that we've had this culture of dividing our citizens by races, except when it comes to white people. So you have African Americans, Indian Americans, Asian Americans, but then they just say, "Oh, that's a white guy," right?
Yeah.
When you describe the police come, "Oh, what was he? Is he a Mexican American? Is he this? Is he African American? Oh no, he's white." So
that's it.
And then you say, "Well, what is white culture?" cargo shorts. My joke is, what is an obsession with cross burning or Dancing with the Stars, or what is white culture? There is no such thing, and it's a way of I think enabling a sense of white supremacy, that America is first and foremost a white nation.
Okay.
And what is white? I don't know. A melanin deficiency? Probably. But the truth of the matter is, the only people that don't deserve some sort of indicator before they're who they are,
Sure.
are the indigenous people of that land, the Native Americans, right? Otherwise, all white people are European Americans, period. Now then, we can decide where we come from in the world, but for the most part, we're all, or Australian or something, but for the most part, we are European Americans, and it's important, I think, that we use that moniker in a way, because it forces us to look back on who we are, where we come from, where our families are from, and what makes a difference. Because in the beginning there was a difference. When the Irish first came, we were the terrible immigrants that were coming to America.
Exactly.
We were going to ruin America with our Catholicism and our shillelaghs and our whiskey and our music and our diseases and all these things. And they used to have signs up that said "No dogs, no Irish," and but the Dutch and the English were fine. So it's this weird thing where then they just, everything that again that looked alike got amalgamated into this one idea of white culture. So for me, it's again standing up for people that just because they don't look like me is important, because I injustice anywhere is injustice against all of us. So that's what my art has been always drawn to and focused on for as long as I can remember. I don't like bullies. That's one thing. Yeah. I'm a vegan for that reason, not because I didn't like meat or eggs or dairy or any of that. It's because I think that that's one of the last bastions of where bullies can exist and exist pretty much penalty free. They can do whatever they want to these poor little creatures, and we've evolved now to a point where we don't need meat to survive, and that's the dairy lobby's got a great lobby, that in America it's like got milk, it does a body good and all of that, So those are some of the other things that I try to advocate for, as well as animal rights, because I have two very lovely puppies at home. They're not puppies anymore, but they'll always be puppies to me. And there's nothing else that in the world. I mean, I don't have friends when I first see them that just like freak out and like, oh my god, Otep Shamaya. No, but when I come home, my dogs, like, that's what they do.
That's what they do every time.
It's just love, it's unconditional love, and and sadly, in scientific experiments, one of the reasons why they use beagles, that breed of dog, a beagle, is because they lack any sense of I guess they don't hold grudges. They just forgive. So anytime you hurt them, they just forgive you, and then they trust you again.
Right.
So they can keep coming back and doing these horrible things to them. And I say, well, listen, there's a whole group of people that deserve it more. Like, I don't know, serial killers, rapists, those kinds of folks. Why don't we use them? Just throw some extra money on their, and give them an extra Twinkie or something, or something like that. But leave these poor little animals alone who don't understand what's going on.
Absolutely. That may be my favorite answer to any opening question I've ever done.
Long and rambling. That's
they're my favorite kind. It becomes a conversation as opposed to just bullet points.
Absolutely.
But you touched on some of it there in terms of the subject matter you cover on Cult 45, and just to reiterate, I sincerely believe you are the epitome of an artist who reflects what's going on in our time. I've been following you. I heard you first on Smash the Control Machine when I was a wee thing, and even then I knew there was something going on. But on Cult 45, the subject matter which you tackle, all of it, and the way in which you communicate it it's so powerful. But I was curious about, because you cover a range of stuff, and most of it you mentioned there, was if any, of the stuff you cover on Cult 45 premeditated, or did you go into this, to make this record with a mission statement about what you wanted to communicate or talk about, or did that kind of develop naturally over the course of the record?
No, it happened. It was very organic. Extremely organic. I didn't when I actually had an entirely, at least when I walk into a studio, I'm quite loquacious, as you can tell, but I'm also I'm an egregious writer. I write all the time, everything and anything. And so whenever I go into the studio, I usually have about 5 bags full of books, and there's sort of amoebic idea of what I think the record might be, and it usually never turns out that way. But when I walked in to when I knew that it was time, because we contractually it was time for us to do another album, I thought, okay, so I got a pretty good idea of what I want to do and what I want to say, and then this happened. Resident Chump got selected and put in place into office, and so I saw very early on the warning signs of what he was going to do to our country, and what he was and who he was going to attack, marginalized communities, and who he was going to try to and what he was going to try to do, which was destroy the America as a superpower, which would then inflate Russia as a superpower again, because they're not really at all anymore. And so walking into the studio, it sort of changed, and I decided that I didn't want to have any producers involved that were going to try to say, well, you're going to divide your audience, and I don't care about that. I've never cared about that, and I won't ever care about that. And it's been 17 years, and I still don't care about it. It's my 8th album, and I don't care about it. I will never care about it. If you like my music, you like my music. If you don't, you don't. People. I had someone the other day write something to me on social media that said that I should stay out of politics. But yet they voted for Trump, who was a reality TV star, a D-list reality TV star. I come from LA.
That's fine.
We never thought of him as a star ever. He was sort of a joke. He was always the end of a joke. But the idea that, and I told him, I said, no, see, I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job as a writer. I'm doing my job as an artist. You do your job as a listener, and you listen. And you can decide whether or not you want to listen anymore. But that's your job. Your job is to listen. So shut up and listen. And that's your job. And so when we came into Cult 45, there were things that were starting to happen outside of even the Trump-Pence placement into the White House. I got to be careful, because I'll ramble on for hours about how much I hate that. But I got a show coming up pretty soon, in an hour. So, there were things that were coming about gender equality and about gender norms. So that's the reason why we wrote Boss. It's about who decides what is feminine or masculine, and because. We go back to my ancestors who come from Ireland, and at one time, men wore dresses, they wore skirts, they wore kilts. I mean, and at that time that was accepted.
Some still do.
And some do, right? Some still do. And so it's like, and they wore makeup in ancient Egypt, and other parts of the country and other parts of the world, sorry. So where does that idea come from? Who decides that? And so when I was writing Boss, I remember that I get a lot of fans who say, "Oh, Otep, you're such a boss bitch. You're such a boss bitch," and I just wondered why we need to genderize that. Unless you hate your attorney, do you call your attorney an attorney? Oh, you're such an attorney bitch. No, that's your attorney. Or your lawyer. Or your doctor, oh, you're such a doctor bitch. Do you do that? No, of course not. That's your doctor, And so there are certain places that gender should play no role. And so I think by assigning that to different roles, it forces people into a permanent underclass, and both men and women, in many ways. Especially in America, little boys are taught a certain way to behave emotionally. Don't cry. Don't react to this. Don't play with dolls. Don't watch this type of TV. Don't like this color. That kind of thing. And I don't know what that does or how that shapes a young mind. I was lucky enough. I didn't really have that with my family. I grew up with a bunch of brothers, and so my mom just let me just run around with them and do whatever I wanted to do with them because I was going to do it anyway.
Right.
But I think that so that's the reason why we decided to tackle Boss. And then there's songs like Be Brave, where I think it's
beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's
really
probably
is.
the closest. I think it's the closest to Perfectly Flawed that I've ever written, as far as a ballad is concerned.
Right.
And and it has a similar message in that I want people to cast away, whatever cultural or anchors or family anchors or whatever it is that people tell you, like what you can and cannot do or can and cannot be. You have to take that step, that first step, to be brave, to step out of your comfort zone and to seek what you want to seek, to be what you want to be. And yes, maybe you'll fail. There's Michael Jordan, a famous basketball player, said he's missed more shots than he made. I think Einstein even said something similar, and in Picasso there's piles and piles of paintings that were never published. And if any great writer, there's piles and piles of crumpled up pieces of paper.
Right.
When they used to
Absolutely.
write on paper. I still do. They call that analog. I don't know, I guess. But I still like the tactile feeling of writing. But, there's, I'll have more, rubbish of things that'll never be printed than the things that actually print. So it's okay to fail. We're supposed to learn from them. We're supposed to learn. We do learn from our failures, and we either learn to give up or we learn to survive and to move on and overcome them somehow.
Right. I was going to touch on your poetry now, but I want to keep that for just a couple seconds, because you touched on something interesting there, which I was curious to ask you about, which was some of the responses you get on social media. Because I follow you, and I've looked at some of that, and to be honest with you, some of the hostility I've seen have kind of been affronted by. And even though you reply back and there's persuasions of reason in there, sometimes it comes back worse, and the belligerence is. But anyway.
Yeah.
But it kind of got me thinking, because I remember I was watching this interview with Richard Dawkins, and they were asking him, is it futile to try and persuade somebody, who is essentially brainwashed, and he is an atheist, is trying to communicate with people who are obviously affiliated with religion. And he said, if it is, it's unfortunate, but that it would be condescending and almost contemptuous to say you're too stupid for me to even argue with you. Yeah. And I was wondering, when you get that kind of hostility, do you share a similar view? Or
no? Well, I mean, there's such a thing as invincible ignorance. There's such a thing as and that comes, I think, from a sense of ego, where they don't want to be wrong and they'll never admit that they're wrong, so they're never going to admit it, even though they might know that they're wrong. And there's also mental illness, so you're not going to be able to argue with someone who is mentally ill. And I've done that with street preachers in America who will say that yoga is satanic, and or they'll misspell Buddhism and I'll tell them, I'm like, well, if it's satanic, you guys should at least learn how to spell if you're gonna say something satanic or not. But it's this. But overall, the reason, and there is this thing, like, you can't beat stupid, right? That's I think people say that, or don't play chess with a pigeon, because the pigeon shits all over the board and doesn't care if it wins or whatever. I don't know, but sometimes I'm not really trying to change their mind, because especially if they are invincibly ignorant or eagerly stupid, I'm not going to change their mind. I might not, or if I do, they're never going to admit it. But what I will do is someone else is going to read that, and someone else is going to learn how to interact with those type of people. Or maybe they feel the same way, but they're not sure how to voice it. So they're gonna learn. They're gonna be pollinated by that in a way that allows them to have those kinds of discourse. And I've seen that happen over the years, where I've seen some of the shyest people who would never ever speak up for themselves or for someone else or for a belief system or for me, learn over the years by reading in the way that I have these sorts of debates, or sometimes just visceral discourse, where they'll learn how to engage with those kinds of people, and then it starts to shut those other people down. Because we have to remember, when you are someone who when you're not eagerly stupid, and you're not invincibly ignorant. You are the ocean, and you're dealing with a puddle. So a puddle is easily stamped away, right? But not an ocean. Right? We're deep and dark, and and sometimes it does get deep and dark. But we can also swim on a surface if we need to. That's where waves are born. So it's but I think it's important in that to engage in those kinds of things, because also if you don't, then it leaves a void.
Absolutely.
It leaves a void where people say, "I'm right. See, I'm right. She didn't answer, so I'm right." And then the other people go, "Yes, he's right." So they'll just follow through, because a lot of people are lazy. That's the reason why they don't do their schoolwork. And I'm guilty of that. I spent most of my time writing or drawing in school. But a lot of, most people would rather go see an action film rather than a documentary. So it's important that that people who have the means to have those kinds of debates and have those kinds of discourse do that, so that you can inspire others and to pollinate them with even just the methodology on how to approach it. My thing is really never, if you're completely, if you're arguing that climate change is real, then there's no reason to defend yourself. Always make them defend themselves. And that they, once they run out of talking points that they've seen in their weird conspiracy theory websites or whatever, then they have nothing left. So whenever it's been hard to address some of the people, because when I was in France, I wore a yellow vest on stage, and so some jackass conservative in America was like, well, they're communists. You don't even know what they're talking about. And so I said, you're assuming I haven't spoken to them and found out what they're fighting for and what they're fighting against, and what and what they support and what they oppose. You assumed that, and that's at your peril. And so I went ahead and sort of destroyed him pretty easily, and then he just told me to fuck off. That was his answer. Okay. So see, again, when you get to that point where you erase all of their, just this, they're communists. Well, okay, well, so, first of all, no, they're not. And second of all, what business is it of yours whether I'm standing in solidarity with these folks who just want a better living wage, and they want fuel prices lower, and they're finding it hard to even have a middle class right now. So what business is that of yours? If you don't agree with it, then fine, fuck off, right? So, but it's the internet. It gives cowards courage, and it gives them this place to come where they didn't have before, where they can just make these absurd claims and make these just nonsense and be tough and think that they can, especially as a woman, try to keep me in my place. Well, that's again at their peril.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
And and when I was there, like some of the French people came up to me after and asked me, those that spoke English very well. My French is terrible. And asked me, do you know what this is about? Do you know what we stand for? And I said, I do. And we had a very good dialogue about it. And they were really grateful that their message had reached outside of France and had reached America and had reached people like me and other advocates and activists. And so it was a really a proud moment for me to have.
I'm glad.
So yeah,
I'm glad. I've only got a couple of questions left for you, and one of them is definitely to do with your poetry.
Okay.
Because I remember one of my favorite pieces of yours, and still is, was when I picked up a copy of Caught Screaming, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, is a collection of Otep's poetry, which I still carry around with me to this day.
Thank you.
And I remember I came across the poem Wani. And it just had such a profound impact on me, because that moniker that was given to you, that the girl who goes grr, just seemed so arbitrary once I read that. And then I came across your deaf poetry dedicated to my enemy, and watching that, that also had a profound effect, because at the start you have the audience kind of giggling to themselves and whatever, and then there is a silence that's just deafening. You can hear a pin drop because they get what you're on about. And I'm kind of wondering, in general, is there a quality to your work where people initially might kind of have some misconceptions, but once they kind of submit to it, or you kind of do what you did on, on HBO, where you kind of make them succumb to it, then they kind of engross themselves
all the time. With everything that I do, well, the first time when I started the band, and we were signed after 4 shows and no demo, and we were thrown onto Ozfest, and I walked out on stage, and there was jeers and all this stuff, and it was just, as soon as we hit, all of a sudden there was like just a dust cloud because everyone was just, big mosh pit going on. With that poetry, which I'm still very, I'm dear friends with Russell Simmons, and I'm very grateful for him, because I'm still, I believe, the only person from the rock genre that ever was allowed to be on the show, because it was quite an urban-based show. But I remember I was playing in New York City that night, and they filmed it in New York City. So I had to go all the way across town, do the rehearsal, and it's different from a live show, right? Because you're all by yourself.
Exactly.
There's all these cameras, and they're coming down. These robotic cameras are coming down out of the ceiling, coming at you.
Polarizing, I'd imagine.
And the stage is only about 6 inches high, and also your mark is way out, and so there's people that surround you all the way. So it's a little intimidating at first. And that was the first time I'd ever done spoken word in that capacity, especially at that level. So when I first arrived, a lot of the poets were there, which I thought, oh man, I'm going to be in heaven. I get to meet other poets. I want to be around other poets, and they were all so territorial and so mean and so rude. No. And so they were like, well, who are you? And what circuit have you been on? And all these things. And I'm like, I'm a singer in a band, and I got invited here, so. And then one of the producers, Stan Latham, who's amazing, came over and he was like, you okay, Otep? He put his arm around me, and, you all right? I'm like, I'm fine. And I remember they were all just, they did like a prayer circle, and they didn't invite me in. And my publicist was fun. This was still when I was still with Capitol Records. He was really funny. He came over and he grabbed me, and he was like, dear Satan. He's like, he just did something really just obnoxious, just to because he saw how unfair they were treating me. Yeah. And I remember Mos Def is one of my favorite lyricists of all time. I mean, he is just really one of the someone who inspired me when I was a wee lass. And I was standing next to him, because you stand backstage, right? You're on deck right before you get to go on. So I'm standing right next to him, and he's watching the monitor, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm standing right next to Mos Def. I was starting to like, don't forget your poem. And I remember I walked out, and there was a group of people sitting in the front, and they all just started giggling. As soon as I hit the first line, you have 7 more seconds to decipher your life before my tongue becomes a blade and your brain gets sliced. And then I get to the next part, right, where I talk about, my birth, where I was premature, and that was factual. My protein donor did not want me born, so he decided to try to get rid of me by punching my mother in the stomach. And so I was born at 7 months. I was born with jaundice. I was 3 pounds. I was 4 ounces. She could hold me in her hand. I was smaller than my 5-pound Chihuahua. And so, by when I started to tell that story, people started to get a little more calm. And then when I got to the point to where I actually illustrated what happened. When I punched myself in the stomach, and the mic was here, so you could really hear it, and it just boomed throughout the entire place. There was an audible gasp in the place, and then I knew I had him. I knew right then I had him. And at that point on, it was just like, mouths open, all eyes on me, listening to every word that I said. And then when after I was done, I was walking past, and I was so. I had such a moment of gratitude and blessed and a feeling of being blessed to be there, and to be able to share those words with those people, even though they didn't believe in me at first, but to be on that show, and to be able to be a poet and to perform poetry, I'm walking past, and like Mos Def tries to grab my hand, and I just kind of like keep going. I keep walking because I'm so emotional at the time. And I get backstage, and then all the poets were there, and they're all applauding.
Nice.
And so I was like, "Thank you, that's very nice of you." And then I was kind of like, "Fuck you guys," too, at the same time. But I get that a lot. I mean, even at shows where people will come and they don't know me, they don't know who we are. Or festivals will play and they don't know who we are, and they'll come up and they'll see this girl with short hair, and and then like, well, what's she gonna do? And then all of a sudden they see what I do, and then that changes everything. Or if someone engages me politically in a political discourse, they see my tattoos and they assume that I'm not educated in that world, or that I don't know enough about certain things that I should know about, or I'm a woman and I shouldn't have certain opinions, and all of that. So. That's again another reason why I wrote songs like "Be Brave," where it's and a lot of those themes are evident in the poetry too, which is to cast away these cultural costumes and these social identities that people are placed on you that again 10 years ago, 20 years ago didn't matter. Or don't matter now. Sorry, they were so important 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but they don't matter now. So why care about them now? If they're if they're an obstacle that's keeping you from reaching your full potential or your promised capacity, then why worry about them? Don't. Yeah. Find a way around them. Fire, under it, over it, or juggernaut right through it. Right through that obstacle. That's what we're supposed to do. And especially the people who have a love of the word for poetry. It's important that we keep that alive, and that we stay true to our authentic selves, because we were, for whatever reason, and whatever you believe in or whatever, that seed was planted in us for a reason, and it's important that we allow it to grow and pollinate others with it as well. There was a young woman here earlier who was part of our VIPs, and she said that she longed to be a writer for so long, and was hesitant that people wouldn't like what she wrote, and that she was afraid that they'd judge her really badly. And she sent me an email about it, or a direct message about it. And I said, "Why do you care? What if someone judges you?
Perfect.
What do you care? Write your truth. Write your truth. Get it out of you. Write. And you know what? Don't publish your first draft. I say, read more than you write, writers. But write your truth, and don't be afraid to. Don't live. You don't have to live up to someone else's standard. You don't have to live up to someone else's idea of who you're supposed to be. You fight for your own identity. Fight for your like I say in equal rights, equal lefts. Fight for your right to exist.
Love it. Yeah. And finally. What you touched on there, when I was here earlier on and I was watching that the VIP, it really kind of brought home the point to me, and forgive my temerity if you disagree, I totally understand, but sometimes I get the impression that Otep, the name, it transcends that idea of a band, it transcends that idea of a person, and it becomes almost like a position. And by that I mean it's somewhere that from what I saw, people feel safe, they feel supported, they feel embraced and inspired and strong. And good. I was wondering, first of all, if you'd agree with that, and if so, who is or was or still is Otep in your life?
Well, I do agree with that, and I'm glad you saw that. That's very kind of you to say, and I'm glad you noticed it. And
I feel very lucky to have seen it. I feel privileged.
Oh, thank you. And most of my family's very literal, very scholarly folks, right? I was the only artist, so it was very lonely growing up. So when I started the band, I wanted to start a community. I was hoping that I would at least encourage some kind of a community that would support each other, even if you didn't understand or agree or never experience the same, whatever experiences they had. If you never had those types of experiences, you'd at least support them in some way. And so we've always been exclusively inclusive.
I love that.
Except for Trump supporters. You guys can go fuck yourself. But I wanted a place where people could feel safe. I wanted them to feel like this was if they could come to a place or listen to something or to read something that would allow them to open a door that would allow them to find their full manifestation, that would make my life complete. I guess the person in my life that continues to do that for me is my mother. You know, that's just the reality. I hope it's not cliche, but it's true. She's the strongest person I know, and she continues to, you know, inspire. And I mean, I remember when I told her I was going to be a singer in a band, she cried, not for the right reasons either. She thought that, oh my God, you're going to be into drugs and all these things. I'm like, no, I'm not. I've never been. Why would I start now? You know. But now she's, you know, my biggest fan, and she's also my, you know, also one of my most fearless, I think, inspirations in life, in the way that she overcame so many obstacles and made sure that we never felt less than, made sure that we always knew that we could be our own person, and so when I speak to her, if I see her, or if I'm around her, I feel safe. And I wanted to make sure that I know that not everyone is lucky enough to have that kind of person in their life, and so I wanted to build a community where they did. So,
Otep, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
the
you.
record is fantastic, and I wish you nothing but the best for 2019 and beyond.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I have to run because